The conversation you're about to hear today on the Media Roundtable is the first time we've released the uncut conversations that became the short series, What's a Podcast? The Revolution Redefined. I'm Dan Granger, CEO of Oxford Road and Veritone One and host of the Media Roundtable podcast. We're giving you the full-length version of specific conversations we had with about 30 of the leaders of podcasting today. That includes creators like Ira Glass, Guy Raz, so many others, as well as leading publishers, advertisers, and thought leaders, where we tried to sit around the table and debate what is a podcast, why does it matter, why'd you get into this to begin with, and what do we need to do to preserve that into the future as we build a bigger definition of what podcasting actually is. Some of these conversations are a snapshot of a very specific moment in time, but they're all durable and timeless in the importance of the conversation. I learned a lot. For me, this whole project was a love letter to podcasting and something that is able to blend real business value with the passion that brought me and so many others into this field. And I think you're really going to enjoy it. So with that, please enjoy this next installment of the full-length interview series, What's a Podcast? What is a podcast and why does that even matter? Who cares, right? It's a show, it's on a platform, it might be on a few platforms, but for some people it really does matter. And whether you work in the business of podcasting or you're just somebody that loves to listen, there is something different about this channel. And as technology evolves, as the world evolves, things are changing quickly, and where people get information is changing and how they get it is changing. And we're here looking at what is a podcast and why that matters. And we're talking to some of the leading voices and minds in this industry to get perspectives on that. I'm Dan Granger, CEO of Oxford Road and Veritone One. And we are doing this as a bit of an open lab environment, the consequence of which is going to be a framework that we're presenting to the industry so that we can continue to grow and protect the thing that we love and that has served so many of us so well. We have an incredible lineup of guests today. We have three brothers who you may have heard of before that have recently found themselves podcast royalty. And apropos for the name, we have Ben, Brett, and Jordy, who together collectively make the MeidasTouch Network. They have recently dethroned Joe Rogan as having the top downloads and views per month. They are the fastest growing independent media network in the world, and they have over 4.5 million subscribers. Guys, so I'm so glad you're here to be a part of this, and congratulations on your recent success.
Thanks for having us, Dan. Love everything you're doing and building over there, and your royalty of the podcast business world. And now you're becoming our competition in the podcast space. So I gotta
say, you saw the vision early on, Dan. So, we appreciate that.
Yeah, we are reaching a couple thousand people. We're going to give you a run for your money. But no, it's listen, people, we do have, it's interesting with the people that follow this show, because people that earn their livings in this business really enjoy these conversations because people like yourself can come on. And I think, look, before we get into all the definition stuff and the industry stuff, I think it's just important to stop and acknowledge what you guys have achieved recently. There's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot of sudden change as Trump has come into office here, and you really tapped a nerve. I guess a simple question is, how did you get to the number one spot in this period of time? You guys have been doing this since COVID, and you've had a real breakthrough recently. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I think we've always been, as we like to say, behind the scenes, just chopping the wood. Day in, day out. It's been a relentless pursuit of doing a great show. It was never, how could we be number 1, number 10, number 15, or whatever. We knew we had to put forward a great show, a great product each and every day, and repeat that relentlessly. And the product needs to get better each day. So in terms of reviewing the data, finding out what performed better and why, and then perfecting the show, and then making it better, and then perfecting it more, and then making it better, and delivering to people what they're looking for, facts, data, receipts, keeping it entertaining, humorous, enlightening, and just, doing that every day. As I've told people before, what's to me kind of separates someone who's going to be very successful in the podcast space versus someone who's going to be less successful. It's really, you have to treat this like you would treat anything you wanted to do in life, that you wanted to be successful. If you were to open up a store or a restaurant, you wouldn't go into it thinking, you know what, I want this hobby store or this hobby restaurant. Like, you go into it saying, this is what I'm going to be doing every day. I want it to be the best restaurant, the best store, the best podcast. So we do that relentlessly every day. And we're always focused on our audience. We knew how smart our audience is. We listened to our audience, and then we built from there. And that's an oversimplification, but it was listening to the audience, chopping wood every day. And then over time, it grew because there was consistency, persistency, and a good quality.
And I'd just like to add, if I could, to that. I just want to emphasize the part that Ben said about not viewing this as a hobby per se, because far too many people, I think, go into podcasting thinking it's easy, thinking that they could do it, thinking that it's going to just be like a walk in the park and they could do this as some sort of side gig, when ultimately you really have to view this as your full-time job if you're going to go into it. You need to go all in on it, or you're just not going to be successful. And I kind of view that with anything in life, but especially if you want to break into this podcasting world, which has been here now for a bit, and it's a very saturated space. If you really want to break through, you need to be taking it very seriously every single day. And part of that, like Ben said, is listening to your audience, which is absolutely key. That applies whether you're doing political stuff like us, or if you're doing a business podcast or a sports podcast. You need to be in tune with your audience. I think that is so incredibly important. And then at the same time, also keeping your audience entertained and informed everywhere. And so, there's differences between platforms, right? And there's so many platforms right now, social media. You got TikTok, you got Instagram, you got YouTube Shorts, you got the podcast apps, you got all this stuff. They all both work separately and have their own kind of ecosystems that you need to understand you can't just necessarily take this piece of content and think it's going to work over here. But at the same time, you need to learn to find ways that all of these various platforms interact with one another. And I think one of the big breakthroughs that we've had, especially in the past few months, that has driven a tremendous amount of growth on the MeidasTouch podcast and took us from being a successful podcast to being arguably the most successful podcast, is by making sure that we were speaking and listening to our audience everywhere, and then using those platforms to then consolidate those audiences in different places. For example, we may do the hour plus podcast with the brothers, but then I might do a minute-long TikTok video on one story or one thing that's in the news, one thing that people want to hear about. In the middle of that video or at the end of that video, you say, hey, you want to hear more analysis about this? Make sure you check out the MeidasTouch podcast. It's on Apple and Spotify. We do our shows, every single day. And then you gradually, over time, you gain a trust with the audience on all these various platforms. You're able to then pull them into your podcast world and have that more intimate experience.
Okay, so this is really helpful to get into some of the tactics here, because you've obviously, I'm kind of hearing two things that are both true at the same time. One is it's chop wood, carry water, and it's do the work every day, and eventually like the world catches up, right? But at the same time, some of the ways that you've gone about doing that, I think you guys have brought a level of professionalism just to knowing how to steward the media in a way that's been very advantageous. So just to deconstruct some of that, is it safe to say that the podcast is really the home base or the anchor for the network?
Yeah, I would say the podcast is, and the show that we do together, us three, is, I would say, is an anchor, is a marquee attraction. It brings everything together.
And then you do sampling across different media, right? And so what are the different other types of media that you'll use to extend that message, extend that reach, and promote kind of the mothership, which is the long form?
All socials. And our only limitation is often if the technology around the socials is not good at scaling. As long as the technology allows scaling, our audience that we've built and cultivated and have really focused on, and we've been loyal to, and they've been loyal to, they go to the platforms, provided the platforms have the technology to have them there. And so, look, on YouTube, there's a certain type of audience. We believe the audience that's kind of cutting their wires, they're cutting the cord, they go to YouTube. It looks like a cable news demographic. Our podcast audience is a nice mixture of kind of younger and older people. TikTok is Gen Z, it's younger. Blue Sky tends to be more liberals and progressives. We're on Threads, which tends to be a little bit more of a mixture of the people who don't really want to be on X, formerly Twitter, but still want to have some social engagement. We're on Twitter, which now tends to be a little bit more kind of chaotic and whatever you want to say is going on there. Different audiences, different places. And then, of course, there's things like Substacks now. Having a daily newsletter go out to our audience, and in many cases, doing multiple emails, newsletters per day. And then, as Brett says, having all of that funnel to each other, linked to Facebook, having all of it link and cross-reference each other, and have a harmony the same way. If you were to watch an orchestra, you would have the different instruments, but it all comes together and plays one beautiful musical compilation. That's basically how we view our socials. Different instruments, but all working together, right? You wouldn't want your trombone to be competing against, your violin, or your sax to be too loud. The musical has to play together. So, that's why sometimes being too big and bloated is a problem, because if your left hand's not talking to your right hand, you're not playing in sync, and then it's a bad musical.
And let me just build on that really quickly too, Ben, because I really like that analogy of the orchestra. It's not enough to just play the instruments. You have to really know how to play the instruments. If you're going to play the trombone, meaning if you're going to show up on Instagram and you're still posting square photos, even though they've recently redesigned to a 16:9 approach, you're 10 steps behind the game. You have to be able to adapt with the platforms as quickly as they adapt and understand consumer habits in a way that allows that orchestra to really, have that nice, beautiful sound. If you're not showing up on the platforms natively, right away, the audience will not think you're authentic, because quite frankly, I'm sorry, you're not authentic. You have to show up natively on each platforms, given those platforms, parameters. And once you're able to really do that, you could really understand your audience and what they like, and it makes sharing content all that easier.
And by the way, be okay with screwing up, right? And be okay with changing course. I think sometimes one of the biggest problems that I see with people is they do something and it's not working. But this is the way they do it. And so they do it, and they do it that way, and they do it that way. And I look at them and I've noticed, I see our growth in a, year period, or whatever the year, whatever the time period is. And then I look at, the person who we may have done a video with or something a few months ago, whatever it may be. And I noticed they're in the same place. And I was like, if I was just in a rut, we are always adapting. We're always trying to figure out what's next. How do we make this better? How do we improve it? Is there a way to refine, to optimize? And it's okay to say, this isn't working. We need to change that. And I think it's actually important to your growth. And so, my recommendation to anybody trying to, do something is, if you've done 100 podcast episodes and nobody's listening to it, maybe try to switch something up and see what happens. And then if you see, oh, okay, when I promoted it like this, we got an extra 100 downloads. Now you're like, oh, wait, maybe I should do more of whatever that was. You keep clicking that button. And then that's how you sort of gradually refine, what you're doing, and continue to chop wood in a productive way, not just like running on a treadmill, going nowhere sort of way.
Yeah. So amazing to hear kind of the method behind the success. How big a staff are you guys running to keep up with all that? Because that's a lot of.
Yeah, pretty lean and mean. I mean, I would say probably about 10 to 12 staffers.
Okay.
And then when you factor in independent contractors and hosts, I mean, it's a sprawling network at this point, with lots of hosts who fill in different areas. So I would say, in total, you probably have 30 to 40 people. but really your core staff is about 10. And in terms of the podcast operations, you're probably actually looking about half of that, probably more like 5.
And
Okay.
Dan, you know this with all the great work that you've done over there at Oxford. It's not enough to just be, the owners or of the company and like, hey, we sit at the top. No, you have to be in there in the weeds in order to actually do great business. And it's what makes you guys so incredible at what you do, Dan. And so it's something we pride ourselves on too, is that, we get dirty every single day. We get in the mud and we love the mud. Like that's where we thrive. And so I think that's been a huge factor to the growth.
Yeah, and Dan, you've seen Jordy, like Jordy's at the sales conferences, and people are sometimes surprised to see
he's hustling. He's not just Adam, he's hustling. He's working the whole time and he's moving it to the next level. But I think it's that restless spirit that's what, it's a through line with your content. It's a through line with your promotion. It's just, you guys got a hell of a work ethic as a part of it, right? So I appreciate that you guys are grinding the way that you are, and I'm glad to see that is paying off. It's like the overnight success in 10 years. You guys did it in like 4. You skipped a lot of steps to get to where you've gotten. I want to go back to the RSS piece for a second. So much of the consumption, you probably have YouTube as your largest, I'm imagining, distribution point for the podcast. How does the video versus pure audio split on your consumption shake out?
It's hard to totally, give like a direct split breakdown, but I'll say YouTube is certainly our primary driver. And our audio is a very large audience and rapidly growing. And especially in this past month or so, week over week, we've seen just astronomical growth. It's been absolutely exponential. But I think one of the interesting things, and, maybe we were a bit prescient in this, was that we always thought that video was crucial. We always thought that video was important. And we, maybe because it was our listening habits and watching habits, knew that people were consuming media this way, especially when it came to our medium of what we specifically do on our show and the way people are cutting the cord with cable news and things like that. So we were kind of video first from the beginning, and we've built from that angle into building up the audio into now what's having exponential growth. I think other folks are almost starting a little behind right now, where they're starting with this audio presence and then trying to figure out how do we break into video. And in many ways, that could be, I think, a bit more daunting and a bit more difficult. So, whether you call it luck or whether you call it, us sort of reading where people were at the time, I think that was, definitely a big thing that has given us a leg up right now. And now with the RSS feeds, we're seeing a big shift in the industry, as you mentioned, where, you look at platforms like Megaphone, which are owned by Spotify, and they're switching up the way RSS feeds work by incorporating video into Spotify, which doesn't use the RSS feed, while still sending the RSS feed to other platforms. And so it's a bit divided. It's a bit more fractured right now. I think there's opportunity there, though. I think certainly there could be a bit of fear anytime something changes, or anytime, we're used to tracking things this way or that way. Brands could be a little apprehensive, but I think there's opportunity in what they're trying to do in bringing video now to all these other platforms and trying to sort of play catch up with YouTube and whatnot. So we've recently started launching the MeidasTouch podcast on Spotify and with their video feature as well, which has been great. We're seeing tons of streams on there. And then they have other features on there which allow us to put clips, which are like 1 minute sort of Instagram clips or TikTok clips, but they have their own version of that. That also drives promotion for people to watch the longer episodes, which has been helpful. And we've seen it featured. And I've had friends go, hey, Spotify's recommending your content and things like that. So one of the things I've noticed too with all of these changes is anytime there's technological development in these social media apps, there is an incentive for those companies to push those features. And I've noticed this across any app. So when YouTube Shorts launched their shorts, we were all over shorts.
Right.
Because we knew they're going to want this feature to be popular. So they're going to be pushing this big. When Instagram Reels did that, we were all over Instagram Reels, right? Because everyone's trying to compete with TikTok in that space. And so now it's the same with Spotify video, right? If they're have this new thing that they're doing, we're going to go all in on that because we know that they're excited about that they want that to be a success. And I think that also contributes to the growth. And I think all of this is just a reminder that everything we do is malleable, that while podcasts feel like they have been around for a long time at this point, it's still such a new industry. And a podcast as you knew it, 2 years ago isn't even necessarily a podcast as you know it today. And that definition is going to continue to change. And so going back to what I was saying before, strategically for your shows and for your content and whatnot, you can never get too comfortable, right? And always be looking at, how is this changing? What's next? Is there something else we should be doing? What's this new service? Is it worth my time to get on Blue Sky? Is it worth my time to be doing this new feature on this app? And you always got to stay one step ahead, because the industry is always trying to push forward, and you could either go along for that ride and be part of it, or you could be left in the dust.
And Dan, one of the things you just reminded me of was, even this predates you and I working together in any capacity. When I first started to try and sell for the network, it was so hard to tell some of these buying groups what a YouTube video was, what a YouTube podcast was. It was only until I somehow, not me personally, but through the conversations we've had, we unlocked the term simulcast, which sounds obvious, right? But it wasn't until we started to use that phrase were we able to actually start doing business for our podcast, because we were video forward. We were video first to begin as the network before we really put the emphasis on the RSS feed. So a lot of brands initially were actually weary about showing up. Ooh, YouTube, I don't really know that space. Podcast, RSS, I totally understand that. But the great thing with our development, and as we grow and as the YouTube channel grows, it just pulls up everything together. So as the YouTube rises, the RSS rises, and it feeds into that whole entire ecosystem. And the last thing I'll quickly say before we move on is what makes YouTube so great too, versus just a standard RSS. And we love the RSS, we do, but the industry is certainly shifting. I think everyone's seeing that. The YouTube shareability, just like we talked about on those other platforms, that's a huge component of successful YouTube channels and networks. The RSS feeds at times can be quite restrictive. Frankly, it's hard to share a podcast with somebody. It's not super glamorous to post. It's, maybe clunky to text. But if there's a video component tied to a YouTube, and you're able to share that with a friend, and the friend may recognize, or there's a cool funky cover art that piques some interest, those become way more shareable, and then it gets people into listening to that RSS standard audio feed.
Have you ever heard of any of these companies? Shopify, Bayer, Oracle, Indeed, Masterclass, Babbel, Tommy John, LegalZoom, Constant Contact. We could go on. And we could go on so much further now that we're joining forces with our friends at Veritone One. We have created the world's largest specialist agency in audio and in podcasting. Nobody's ever done anything like this before. And it's an exciting opportunity for everybody involved. What we do at this agency is we offer comprehensive services for brands that are looking to break out and be successful in this space. We call you the chief audio officer because we believe that what you need requires real specialist work. And the way that we approach it includes proprietary methods in media planning and buying, analytics and attribution, insights. We have a proprietary process called Audiolytics, which is our trademark method for creative development that allows us to score ads for their persuasiveness. Audio isn't just the work that we do, it truly is our passion, and we aim to elevate this industry to new heights. And that's why we're the leaders in brand safety and suitability, as well as in volume in the space. We try to provide solutions that ensure that your ad buys align your values that you have as a brand with your business metrics that you need to be successful. This stuff is hard, but we're here to make it a little bit easier for you. And if you're a chief audio officer seeking best in market performance at maximum viable scale, please get in touch with us. Do the right thing. Go to oxfordroad.com. And if you're passionate about audio, if you're strategic, if you're relentless, and you're looking for a career change, consider joining our mission as an agent of influence. Send us your resume through our website, oxfordroad.com. We made it really easy to spell. Sign up for our free newsletter, The Influencer, and be sure to mention that you heard about us right here on the Media Roundtable podcast, because attribution is important. Thanks, everybody. It's so interesting because I think that has been the breakthrough. I mean, you've got YouTube claiming 1 billion users per month now of podcasts, right? Who would have dreamt? And I do think the video, people think that video is really about adding that dimension of sight, but I actually think the reason it's become so important is what you guys have said, why you like the reels and the shorts. It's that shareability. It allows you to do sampling in a way that audio is never able to do on its own. And so I think, the audio business and audio native podcasts have always been limited in how much they could really self-promote. And you guys have just mastered that brilliantly. And so I want to get to the definition. Do you guys identify as podcasters? What would how do you think about that term, or do you see yourself as something else? Because you're everywhere. You could be anything. You could be social media influencers. You could, you can kind of define yourselves any way you want. You deserve it. But how do you deal with the term podcaster?
I would say that we have a media network, which is the MeidasTouch Network. Under the network, we have podcasts. And I think at this point in 2025, you could use the term podcast as interchangeable with a show. The podcast to me still connotates that there is an audio component to it, even if there's the simulcast. But to me, a podcast is a show. And then I somewhat differentiate shorter shows as calling them hot takes, or even a hot take can be a show or can be a podcast. To me, at its peak, MeidasTouch is a media network that has shows and podcasts. And really, definitionally, the difference between a show and a podcast is a bit illusory at this point.
And Dan, you could call us whatever you want, but just don't call us not hardworking.
Yeah, well, we can't do that. Well, it's interesting though, and I think, Jordy, you were touching on this earlier, and this is where I think the rubber meets the road with marketers, is that it's hard for people to budget for things if they don't know how to define them, right? And I think there's a lot of people, I've been having this conversation with a lot of different folks. We were just talking to Ira Glass. We've got perspectives from everybody. And a lot of people take the position that, well, it's just a show. Call it whatever you want. It doesn't matter. But when you're in the room with the marketer, and Jordy, you'll know this better than anybody, if you can't help them define it, it's hard for them to know how to budget for it, right? Totally. And so sometimes these things can matter. And when we're trying to assess, is the podcast industry, which has been getting audited and measured, it kind of stalled out at $2 billion, which I think had a negative effect on people's optimism that this is a channel worth investing in. And downstream, that can be, you guys have kind of built yourself above this by touching so many different types of media, but knowing how to classify really, I think, can have implications. So, I mean, when you're talking to brands,
there's an important point there, though. So I think there's a huge value proposition for the brands that you and others in this space are representing, because at this point, our audiences, someone who watches the MeidasTouch Network, our competitors, as we see it, are more like MSNBC, CNN, and Fox. And so if they're paying, let's just say, a Sean Hannity CPM, they could be paying a 60, 70, 90. I know those CPMs well. You could be paying a $90 CPM at 2 million views, and maybe you get a discount here or there, and you're spending, anywhere from $75,000 to $100,000 for a 30-second spot without a host ad read or without the ability to convert.
And you're the fifth in the break.
Exactly. And people don't really watch commercials the way they did, like that, or you're now going to a network that's getting basically the same views, a very loyal audience, where some of our biggest issues right now, as you know, is Jordy serves as a pretty strong gatekeeper. We just want to make sure that we're aligning ourselves with the brands that make sense. And it's part of a broader conversation that takes place because, there's with all the news that we're beating Rogan, as you know, the floodgates are open and everyone wants to be on this network. But at this point, there's a bigger value proposition where I'm not trying to undersell Jordy, but Jordy's not yet selling at the Sean Hannity number, but we are giving that type of value that's out there for a 60-second host ad read. So however you want to frame it, I actually view it as probably the biggest value proposition. And at some point, as this progresses, it's going to hit the point where I think our show will command a Hannity or primetime CNN, Fox, CPM. But at least for the next 2 or 3 years, your clients are getting, I think, the ultimate bargain and discount, if I do say so myself.
Here's one great more thing about YouTube. You know, again, it's about really understanding the platforms and turning the keys. Initially, sponsors were like, okay, but how are we going to convert? You can hyperlink from YouTube. Yeah, you actually can hyperlink directly from YouTube. So when we do our ads, it's actually an extra layer of care that we would give versus, you know, just to continue the Hannity analogy, Hannity, because now all of a sudden we're putting that sponsor link right in the top of our description. You're one click away from getting to X, Y, and Z brand with your promo code already attached to your checkout. And you're naturally, when you're watching YouTube, you know, I would fancy to say half the time you're on your computer or on your phone or whatever, just a device where you're literally one click away. So that level of customer care is something too that we truly value with our partnerships.
Okay, so in terms of what you guys have been able to achieve, you know, kind of getting back to the show a little bit, you've been doing the work, and obviously you've been just masterful in how you've managed all the levers of promotion. How much of a factor is the marketplace, though? And in your case, the marketplace is politics, right? Being the opposition and being in position to be the foremost voice of the opposition at the time that Trump took office, how much is that tailwind impacting the bump that you're seeing?
I get that question a lot, and some people are like, well, you know, it's politics and you're opposing Trump. So then I'm not suggesting that's how you framed it, but so what do you think about that? I said, I think that we've really been a market maker with our authentic voice in what we're doing. And we've actually never followed a specific market one way or another, whether we're in the quote unquote opposition or not in the opposition, whether it's a resistance posture or an offensive posture. You know, going back to what we started at, you know, we're chopping wood and we're speaking the same way. We're saying the same things, and we're not kind of laboratory created. And I've been doing a lot of interviews lately where people say, you know, the left's been looking for, you know, their own Joe Rogan and they found it. And I go, well, the interesting thing is they found it with people who don't view themselves that way. So I don't know if I'm undercutting your narrative, but I don't believe that that's what I am. I just believe that I have a media network with my brothers that does a podcast and has a number of podcasts where we speak about issues, how we see them. And it's that authenticity that's permeated and built the audience. And so to me, it is the audience that is the secret ingredient here. And the market is the fact that there are a lot of people who are coming together, and whether we are on this feed or this platform or that platform, they want to hear your voice as technology evolves. And so when we go into Substack, between September when we started to March now, we're in the top 5 competing against people who have been on that platform for 5 years. We're already there in 6 months. Why? Because we built, market diminishes, market's a term for marketer, so we should use it here. But the group of people, the consumers of this content and this data, want to support it on an array of platforms. And that to me is what is often overlooked. And it's frankly why corporate media has problems when they try to come into this lane versus us going into other lanes, because they've controlled the piping. So in many ways, their audience didn't have a lot of selection, so they could pick from 3 or 4 or 5 who they're going to watch. And then they picked the one that they thought most watched, but that didn't actually mean they liked them. They were just kind of forced to pick amongst the various options. Now the consumer has the choice. They can really vote and align their interest with who's putting quality, consistent, going back to what we said earlier, and they're now forming these groups. So now It's why our platforms are bigger than any of these legacy and corporate media platforms when they try to get onto these spaces. So that to me is the key. And it hasn't been following the trend. And so to the people who are listening to this who think, okay, there's a trend, podcast bros are what's in. Let's be a podcast bro. Well, if you're a podcast bro, great. If that's truly who you are, then do it. But don't follow that because you're like, oh, podcast bros talking about these things makes you money. You're going to fail. Be who you are and then do it 100% and treat it like it's your full-time life, goal. And that's it. That's how I view the market.
Well, and by the way, I just want to say I don't view you guys as podcast bros, although except in the literal sense that, what's interesting, I mean, look, I've worked in spoken word media for 20 years. And before Oxford Road in 2013, I was in talk radio for 10 years. And voices on the left could not penetrate. I was part of, we brought in, you may remember Air America, right? And we had, Mark Maron. We couldn't get $25 a spot for his radio show at that time. Al Franken. I mean, you had real talent that was doing it. They couldn't break through. And it's extraordinary to see that you have been able to reach heights that traditionally you might see that on the right, if you want to call Rogan the right. I think, similar narrative, but I have not seen this. This is a phenomenon for somebody on the left to break through in a spoken word led format. And I think that that's something you guys should be proud of, in addition to the fact that you did this as a dependence. I don't understand how that's even possible, but you've kind of turned the whole model on its head. And when was the last time you saw somebody come out of nowhere with no infrastructure from the outside and self-build and self-promote and get to these heights from this position? You're in rarefied air.
Yeah, no, we appreciate it, but look at what's interesting about all of that is that if you actually go through the data, it's incongruent with what the data is. Actually, where we are is actually where Americans are on most of the data. Most Americans, if you took away left and right paradigms and you talked to them about where they stand on issues regarding workers, climate, women's rights issues, equality, taxation, billionaires versus workers, living wage, even when you go to issues of kind of immigration and the distinction between criminal people and people who are here working hard and contributing to the economy, you go through most issues, and what you find is that 65 to 75% of Americans, by and large, actually agree. So the question is if we actually agree on a lot of things, how are we so divided? And I think that there is a manufactured rage that has divided us. And I think if we can substitute that manufactured rage by replacing it with acknowledging where the real rage should be, but supplementing it and complementing it with the truth, and then presenting the podcasts and the shows in a way that's calm and not yelling and talks to the audience, not down to them. To me, it was obvious, and the data bore it out. And that's why we started making it very clear. And you go back to the interview you and I and the brothers did a long time ago. We were very consistent back then with what the vision was going to be about how we viewed right, left, center paradigms and how we were framing things as pro-democracy and what that meant. And so that's been our consistency, but it actually aligns with where the people are.
Yeah.
And then
well, you're giving them something they want. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that I think there's an element also, practically speaking, politics aside, one of the reasons I think us being independent works so well, I think actually us not having an idea of a structured way of doing things allowed us to be a bit more liberated and to experiment and to try things. And so, I figure if you're going in and you're working with a traditional podcast studio, they probably have a very defined way of making clips for social media. If they even do that, they probably have a very, very defined way of what does a show look like in general. Do we do video? Do we not? And for us, in 2 seconds, I could go out and I could say, hey, take out my phone and be like, hey, I'm recording this video. Remember to watch the MeidasTouch podcast. It doesn't have to go through a whole hierarchy of approvals and whatnot and get noted to death. And then the next thing you know, that video has had 2 seconds removed and had one word changed to this, and it comes out 4 days later, and you miss the whole wave of people you could have been promoting to because you got caught up in that corporate sort of hierarchy. And so I think in that way, the independence actually helped us. I don't think, honestly, I don't think we could have, and I'm not saying this necessarily applies to everybody, but I don't think we could have gotten to where we are right now if we weren't independent and doing it the way that we have.
That makes a lot of sense. And, it's so fascinating because one of the things we've been talking about on this series with folks, and some folks have been doing this for 20 years, when the industry started taking shape, it was a lot of people, it was more of a meritocracy, right? There were no networks. There was no representation infrastructure. It was somebody putting something out into the world, and hopefully the world liked it and told somebody else about it, right? But it's gotten harder with the consolidation of the pipes, the consolidation of the platforms. And now where you had channels, podcasting is kind of a metaphor in your case, but it's the open internet and the ecosystem that allows anyone to self-select and say, I have something to say and I'm going to say it. It's gotten harder to break through. And you've gone through a lot of headwind to separate from a pack without the machinery behind you by creating your own machinery. And what I hear you saying is that actually was your secret weapon.
Yeah, I think that definitely helped in addition to, understanding our community, listening to our community and working really hard and adapting on the fly, not being able to, not being afraid to make changes, to make sudden shifts in strategy, to decide, hey, maybe what if we try this on Instagram? What if we try this on TikTok? And just letting everything kind of all, work together in that way. I think it's so important.
One of the biggest things I say about the network is it's truly an egoless movement. Like the brothers and I may be the hosts of the podcast and the founders of the network, but like we don't view ourselves on any sort of pedestal. Like we are right there in the weeds with the community. And it's this community that is so hungry for the receipts, for the information that they could take back to their circles, which motivates us every single day.
And I think you got to think like, what are you delivering to somebody that's unique, right? Like, to borrow a phrase, any three bros could do a podcast, right? So like what, you got to find the thing that makes, that makes you special. I think in our case, I think the fact that we're actually not from the world of politics made us special in a world that was filled with political consultants and a bunch of people who people are quite frankly sick of and who have guided people in wrong directions and don't seem to be listening to what people are actually doing. I think our interaction with one another, that it's not just straight, this happened in the news, then this happened in the news, but we kind of throw some jabs at each other. We make fun of each other. There's some brother banter in there. There's family, there's motivation. People leave feeling empowered. And I think that could be applied to literally anything, right? You need to figure out what's going to make your product special ultimately, that somebody's going to want to listen to it and listen to you over somebody else. And that applies if your podcast is about sports, if your podcast is about cars, you could do anything, but when you have your niche, and I think picking a niche is very important in this space. But when you have that niche, make sure that you are separating yourself from the pack. What makes you unique? And I do firmly believe that everybody is unique and everybody has something that makes themselves unique. And sometimes they don't know what that is. Sometimes it takes a long time for them to figure out what that is. Sometimes they're trying to mimic what this guy who I listened to and let me do exactly what he did. And that might be a good strategy at first also to get your bearings, act as sort of training wheels. But at a certain point, you got to figure out what defines you, what are people liking about what I'm doing, and you got to do more of that.
Yeah, it seems like it's been very grassroots for you guys. And I think, we're talking a lot about the technique of promotion and just, the hard work and the labor. But I think at the core of it, and I don't think you can get to where you've all gotten to if you don't win people's trust. And I think that at the end of the day, and maybe that's some of what you're talking about, is that you guys have been very grassroots. You've been very organic. This wasn't manufactured in a lab. This wasn't handed down through the ranks of a corporation. You guys kind of self-selected, said, we have something to say, and then you just optimized and optimized and optimized. But in the process of that, you've been able to hold the trust of your audience, which, by the way, is not just good for ratings, it's also good for the advertisers who support it. So
hey,
well
I wouldn't
done.
want to do, genuinely, I would not want to do the show. I would not want to build this network if I had to do it in a way that felt like I was lying about who I am, or felt like I was duping an audience or anything. It wouldn't be fun for me to do a show and say, oh, we need to do, we need to be cooked up in a lab to look like this and sound like this and have this perspective
points, and you have to say these. Yeah,
that's it's wholly uninteresting to me. I don't think it's right, and you'll never have an actual bond with the audience. But I think the coolest thing, the most liberating thing, and why this is, quite frankly, the greatest job I ever had that doesn't feel like a job, is because we get to do this. We get to be ourselves. We get to be with our family. We get to do this as brothers. We get to have a real relationship with a community who understands where we're coming from. We understand where they're coming from. And I think it's those relationships and that sort of authenticity that we carry through in everything that we do, which drives it probably even more than any sort of specific political message,
Okay, I know we got to get you out of here in a little bit, but one piece of trivia I'm interested in is, how do you guys make decisions when there's a dispute among you for the business?
There's rarely any. There always has to be a complete agreement of anything material. Number one. So
it's not 2 out of 3 carries.
Correct.
No, it can't be 2 out of 3. Well, if 2 out of 3 carry, the other person will then have to agree. So
you have to fold.
If it's 2 out of 3, the other one's Jordy.
The other one has to fold because you can't have to hold a grudge. But the family component, though, to it has been very helpful, because obviously, I mean, we all get along. I mean, there's brother banter back and forth, but we can move quickly. We're usually on the same page. We're in constant communication with each other, and we're almost 95% aligned to more on anything material.
I wonder if that's a real competitive advantage, just the fact that you guys were raised with shared values, and you probably had to do some co-regenting of resources growing up. And so is that something you think you learned growing up together on how to function cohesively as a team?
Absolutely.
Look, I think our age, I'm not going in and doing a Freudian analysis of us, but I think that our age gaps were helpful. Like, we weren't so close where it was all that kind of competitive, where, I'm 5 years older than Brett. I'm 8 years older than Jordy. We each kind of had a little bit of a different kind of skill set in terms of what we were interested in terms of Brett being really the musically kind of technical, engineering, editing kind of minded, Jordy being very empathetic, compassionate, marketing minded. I was kind of a student government president type who would kind of organize things. And so it was a compliment. We're lucky because it was a complementary skill set, and we all had things that each other lacked. There are parts of the business that I know that Brett runs that I could never run, ever.
1,000%.
And there are parts of the business that Jordy does that I could never run either. And there are probably parts that they say are that I do that they can never, And so we each complement each other's weakness, and we delegate that out to that person. That's their strength. And then we never really have to worry about, those things. Like, if you asked me to start going through a spreadsheet, I would probably get down to number 3 before I lost patience in it. But then I could probably give you a photographic memory of the last 50 cases that were filed, and what their implications were, and give you every footnote in them. So we all help each other.
And that's why we don't have Ben filling out those RFPs.
Yeah, that makes sense. Last question, we'll get you guys out of here. What's next?
What's next is we keep on growing. As we went back and we looked at an article that we did, 3 or 4 years ago, where we talked about as it was quoted by the reporter, our audacious plans. And it was back then even to say, one day we want people to talk about us in that conversation with a Fox and a CNN and an MSNBC, because we want to have that level of impact. And, in 4 short years, we kind of already are being talked about in that group. And so, and so now is the time to continue to grow, to build out the infrastructure, to scale in opportunistic ways that don't undermine in any way kind of the core quality of the work. We build out more podcasts. We build out more YouTube channels that are on brand. We stay nimble and a little bit decentralized to empower other great creators and people with great ideas to do what they need to do without micromanaging them, but to use our kind of network and resources. And you can scale in a very sophisticated and significant way, I think, by doing that. We've got great Gen Z reporters. We got great reporters from the South who are building out, podcasts with authentic voices. We've got great legal podcasts. And look, the decline in corporate media and their either firing, separating, or resignations of top talent provides a great opportunity for us to find some of these kind of great former, corporate reporters who are now seeing that this is the brave new world and, try to enticing them to join our network in some capacity with unique value propositions. So that's really it.
Well, you're doing something right. Listen, I mean, guys, it's so fun to watch your success compound and to see the hard work pay off, and appreciate what you guys are doing for this industry and really putting your heart and souls into the message. And thanks for coming back to spend time with us. Excited to continue the partnership.
I'll say this, thank you for the work that you're doing. And, you're a true industry leader, and platforms like this as well that, and I'm not just saying this to just try to be nice to you at the close of the show, so you give us a nice write-up, but being a true industry leader is about sharing the knowledge with the community and not hoarding the knowledge. And, we could have had these conversations privately, because we're close friends. And I knew it was important to you to let others know about it because knowledge is power, and to share the resources and data to empower others in the industry to do what you're doing, what we're doing. And to me, that's the testament of a true leader.
Well, thank you. And I just want to respond to that and say, that's what I love so much about this medium is that we can actually do whatever we want with it, and we can make it a forum. You don't have a town square. You have this. This is our town square. And this is where we can come together as an industry and go, all right, how do we work through stuff? Where will we go from here? And how do we help each other when we're struggling with different aspects to it? So I just love this open lab environment, and I'm grateful you guys are participating. Let's keep it going. That was another conversation from our full series, What's a Podcast? And whether you're a podcaster, an advertiser, or somebody who just cares about this space, I hope this stretched you. It's certainly stretched me and is giving us a lot to think about in how we want to live going forward and protect and preserve the essence of the medium while preparing for the changes we need to make to evolve on the road ahead. If you want to hear the full limited 3-part docuseries, What's a Podcast? The Revolution Redefined, check it out wherever you listen to your shows. But if you want to go beyond that and you want to be a part of the movement that we've got here, it's not just about our defining it. It's about figuring out a path forward. Go to our link in the show description and download our free white paper, What is a Podcast? That has research from over 4,000 Americans on what consumers believe that the industry is. And make sure you sign our petition, also available in the link in the show description, to keep podcasting open. This show is not just about content, learning, or entertainment. This is about having a real effect in the real world on issues that are important to all of us. We hope you'll continue to be a part of it and bring this into real life. Go to oxfordroad.com for more resources or click the links in the show description. Thanks for your time.